Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. What was meant to be a quiet weekend visit turns into a high-stakes battle against a twisted HOA scam targeting the elderly. When Mike uncovers a plot to steal his mother's home through fake guardianship, he sets out to expose the scheme, armed with hidden cameras, a sharp mind, and zero tolerance. If someone had told me that my peaceful weekend visit to Mom's place would end with me installing hidden surveillance equipment and calling in a legal team, I would have laughed and poured another cup of tea. But as I stood in her cozy kitchen that Friday afternoon, watching steam rise from the kettle and listening to the creak of her old wheelchair as she wheeled herself to the front window, I had no idea I was about to meet the human embodiment of entitlement in yoga pants, Karen. The house itself was nothing special to most people, a single-story ranch with a small front yard nestled on the outer edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood near Austin. But to me, it was a fortress. I'd bought it 8 months ago under my name, specifically because it wasn't part of any HOA jurisdiction. After years of watching elderly people get steamrolled by HOA committees masquerading as community service, I wanted my mother far away from that nonsense. And for a while, it worked. Mom loved it. The garden, the bird feeders, the lack of neighbors knocking about mailbox paint codes. It was her little sanctuary, and I'd made sure she had a full-time caregiver, Cheryl, on rotation during the weekdays. Seemed like a sweet, competent young woman. Low maintenance, no drama. Or so I thought. I was only supposed to stay 2 nights. I'd driven in early that morning, stopped for groceries, and even picked up her favorite cinnamon raisin muffins. We spent most of the afternoon chatting, catching up on my cases, her books, her garden, and laughing about some old student who had tried to sneak a raccoon into her classroom back in 1994. But then the doorbell rang. "Would you mind getting that, sweetheart?" she asked. "It's probably Karen. She stops by sometimes. Lovely woman, very community-oriented." "Karen," I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Oh yes," she nodded, adjusting her shawl. "From the neighborhood committee or whatever. Brings brochures, very polite. I think she checks in on all the seniors around here. Isn't that sweet?" I didn't answer. I was already walking toward the front window, and there she was, mid-50s, platinum bob, pressed khakis, oversized sunglasses on her head like she was heading to a tennis match, and a leather folder hugged to her chest like she was about to audit our taxes. She was standing just outside the gate, not inside, but leaning with just enough body language to make it feel like she owned the place. Mom wheeled up beside me. "That's her," she whispered. "She always smiles and asks about my health." "Uh-huh," I nodded, not smiling. "And you're sure she's just a neighbor?" "Oh yes," Mom said. "She lives a few houses down. Keeps saying the HOA is working on new programs for seniors. She's probably just excited to tell me more." I opened the door and stepped outside. Karen's smile was immediate, but rehearsed, like the kind you'd see in a realtor's profile photo. "Oh, you must be Dorothy's son," she beamed. "Michael, was it?" "It's Mike," I replied, not shaking her extended hand. "You're from the HOA?" "President of the Windwood Hills Homeowners Association," she said proudly, like she expected applause. "I like to personally check in on all our senior residents. We have so many exciting initiatives for elder care, home management, community wellness. Your mother has just been the sweetest." "She's not part of your HOA," I said plainly. The smile twitched, but didn't drop. "Oh, that's what she said too. But according to our boundaries, we include the entire ridge past Fairbanks Lane. This home falls right within our community map." I exhaled slowly. "Well, funny thing. This house, it was never part of your HOA. Not when I bought it, not now. You might want to update that little map." Karen chuckled, like I'd told a joke. "Maps can be outdated, but bylaws are clear. We're just trying to help your mother manage her property with less stress." "And I'm managing it just fine," I replied, firm but polite. "Thanks for checking in. We've got tea going. Good evening." I turned back toward the house without waiting for a response. Behind me, I heard the clack of her clipboard and her voice, bright and practiced, calling, "Tell Dorothy I'll be by later with the latest senior assistance forms." Back inside, I closed the door and turned to Mom, who looked concerned. "She's just being nice," she said softly. I nodded. "Sure, just next time, don't talk to her alone, okay?" She looked confused, but didn't argue. Cheryl came back from the laundry room, humming. I asked if she knew anything about this Karen and got a non-committal shrug. I think she drops off newsletters sometimes, HOA stuff. I never really paid attention. That night, I sat on the couch pretending to watch late-night reruns, but my mind was elsewhere. Karen hadn't looked like someone dropping off soup and neighborly goodwill. She looked like someone scouting for a signature. I barely slept that night. Not because anything happened, not because there were noises in the yard or flashing lights outside. Just that sort of tension that hums in the background when you know something's off but can't yet prove it. I lay on the pull-out couch in Mom's guest room, staring at the ceiling fan, clicking with each turn like a metronome, while my mind chewed through every detail of Karen's visit. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her outright, yet, but I was going to figure out just how far this woman had wormed her way into my mother's life. Mom was already up by the time I came into the kitchen, a cup of tea in her hands, her wheelchair parked by the bay window where she liked to watch birds. "You want eggs?" she asked. "I can supervise while Cheryl makes them." I smiled. Maybe later. "Quick question. When Karen comes over, does she ever bring paperwork?" She blinked. "Paperwork?" "Like things to sign." "Oh, well," she said, looking thoughtfully out at the window. "She did bring a few forms last week. Something about senior aid, I think. There was a part about giving temporary rights to manage home maintenance or something, but she said it was just to make sure I didn't have to deal with bills or garbage pickup. She said most elderly homeowners sign it eventually." My stomach tightened. "You didn't sign anything, right?" She gave a small laugh. "Of course not. I told her I'd wait until you looked it over. I may be old, but I'm not dumb, Mike." "Good," I said, though the knot in my gut didn't ease. "Do you still have the paperwork?" "I think I gave it to Cheryl to look at. She said she'd keep it safe." "Interesting." When Cheryl returned from her grocery run later that morning, I caught her in the hallway as she was unpacking. "Hey, quick thing," I said casually. "My mom said Karen brought by some HOA forms last week. Said you held on to them." She paused, then smiled like she was trying to remember a distant memory. "Oh, yeah. I think I tossed them. They weren't anything serious. Just some flyers and volunteer sign-up sheets." "Mind checking again?" "Just in case." She hesitated a second too long. "I'm not sure where I put them." "I'll look later." "No worries," I said, forcing a smile. "If you find them, just let me know." She nodded, then turned a bit too quickly and disappeared into the guest bedroom. The rest of the day passed uneventfully on the surface, but under it, I was watching everything. How Cheryl paused a bit too long when Karen's name came up. How she seemed to step out more often than usual to take phone calls, and how she kept giving vague, useless answers when I asked about any visits that had happened when I wasn't around. That night, while Mom slept and Cheryl read on the patio, I opened my laptop and accessed the county parcel map database. It took less than 10 minutes to confirm what I already knew. This house was not within HOA boundaries, not even close. The closest edge of Windwood Hills was a 2-lane road away, blocked by an old fence line and a dry creek bed. Karen's entire premise was fiction. But fiction, I was starting to realize, didn't stop some people, especially people in power, from acting like it was real. On a hunch, I logged into my business document vault and pulled up the property deed. My name was right there, in bold black ink. No co-signers, no life tenancy clauses. My mother's name wasn't even listed as a resident, much less an owner, which meant any attempt to solicit her signature for anything related to the property was not just suspect, it was legally meaningless. Unless they tried to fake something, or worse, if someone inside helped them nudge her toward signing under the pretense that it would help Mike. The next day, I made sure to stay in the background. I pretended to be on conference calls for most of the morning, kept my laptop open, headphones in, and eyes just enough above the screen to see what was happening in the house. Around 11, Karen appeared again. I watched from behind the living room curtain as she stood at the gate. Mom wheeled up to the window but didn't open the door. A short conversation played out through the screen. I couldn't hear it, but Mom seemed flustered. Karen's tone, from what I could see, was sweet but insistent. Cheryl appeared out of nowhere, stepping outside and leaning in to talk quietly with Karen. A minute later, she returned inside, breezing through the hallway like nothing had happened. I waited 10 minutes, then stepped out to check the mailbox. It was empty, but I noticed something odd. Under the doormat sat a folded pamphlet, HOA branded. Tucked inside was a paper labeled Voluntary Guardianship Agreement, Preliminary Discussion Copy. No signature lines, just a header and a few boxes that looked like placeholders for dates and names. That was it. I was done watching. That evening, while Cheryl was in the shower, I opened the attic access and pulled out my go bag from law school days. 2 pinhole cameras, one disguised as a smoke detector, another as a motion sensor. By midnight, both were live, one in the living room, one angled at the front door. I wasn't going to guess anymore. I was going to catch them. The next 72 hours were a test of patience, the kind that makes you want to rip the cord out of the wall and march into someone's front yard with a bullhorn. But I waited. I smiled through breakfasts. I listened to Mom talk about her new mystery novel. I even let Cheryl help me plant begonias without letting on that every word she said made my internal alarm scream louder. The cameras were working perfectly. The app on my phone gave me a live feed and stored motion-triggered clips in encrypted cloud storage. I didn't watch constantly. I didn't need to. I just checked the alerts. The first 2 days, nothing useful. Karen came by once, mid-morning. She stood at the gate again, waved, chatted briefly with Cheryl, then left. Mom was asleep at the time, all surface-level pleasantries. Cheryl brought in a small stack of mail that day, but I didn't see her open anything unusual. Then, on Sunday afternoon, the pattern broke. I was in my car with the AC on, parked a block down, pretending to be gone for the weekend. Cheryl knew I'd left for business. I made a point of rolling my suitcase out and hugging Mom goodbye, who seemed genuinely sad to see me go. She didn't know I'd doubled back and parked at the Walgreens a mile away, watching, waiting. At 2:37 p.m., my phone buzzed. Front door, motion alert detected. I pulled up the feed. Karen. Same neat bob, same smug expression. This time, she wasn't alone. She was carrying a clipboard and a large folder. Cheryl let her in through the gate. That was new. I turned up the volume. "He's out of town for a few days," Cheryl said in a low voice as Karen stepped onto the porch. "Now's a good time. Just don't push too hard. She's been anxious lately." Karen patted her arm like she was handing off a souffle. "It'll be quick. I've done this dozens of times." They entered. The second camera picked up their voices from the living room. My mother was seated in her recliner, blanket over her knees, half a crossword filled out on her lap. Her face lit up when she saw Karen. "Oh, it's you again. I didn't expect visitors." Karen smiled warmly. "Just checking in, Dorothy. You remember we talked about helping you manage things so Mike doesn't have to worry." "Oh, yes," Mom nodded, "but I was waiting to talk to him." "Well, I brought the first part of the paperwork. Don't worry, nothing official yet. Just a draft so you can look it over. If you'd like, we can go through it together." Mom hesitated. "Is it a lot?" Karen sat beside her, opening the folder. "Not at all. Just a preliminary guardianship draft. If you sign this, I can take care of all the HOA coordination, your utilities, maintenance scheduling, everything. No more stress, no more confusing paperwork. Mike will thank you for it. Trust me." Cheryl appeared behind them, placing a cup of tea on the side table. "It's just like when my aunt signed hers," she said gently. "Made life so much easier. Karen's been helping lots of families. Really saved us." Mom looked at the form. Karen handed her a pen. "Just here and here. It's not legally binding yet. We'll file it with the notary after your son returns, if you still feel good about it. It's more of a promise to yourself." Mom lifted the pen with a shaky hand. I tapped the screen. Rewound, recorded, saved, twice. I was already calling Detective Alvarez at the county sheriff's office. She picked up on the second ring. "It's happening," I said. "I've got video, audio, date and timestamp, unauthorized entry, coercion, attempted fraud, elder pressure, whatever you want to call it." "I'm 15 minutes out," she said. "Keep eyes on. Do not interfere yet." Too late for that. I was already in drive. When I pulled into the driveway 7 minutes later, I barely bothered to shut the car door. Karen was still inside, leaning forward, pointing to a section on the form. Cheryl noticed me first and stiffened. Karen turned slowly when she heard the front door open. "Mike," she said, too brightly. "We didn't expect you back so soon." "No," I said. "You didn't. But I didn't expect someone to break into my house under the guise of community support either. Guess we're all having surprises today." Mom looked confused, blinking between us. Karen stood. "Now hold on a moment. This is just a discussion. Nothing has been signed, and your mother invited." Detective Alvarez entered behind me, followed by a uniformed deputy. Karen froze. "I'd like to see your ID," Alvarez said calmly. "This is a mistake," Karen stammered. "I'm the HOA president. We're here to provide services." "Ma'am, you are not authorized on this property. You are not a legal guardian. You are not a listed caregiver. This is an attempt to solicit signature under false pretense. That's a crime. And we have video." Karen's lips parted, but no sound came out. Alvarez turned to Cheryl. "You too. Step outside. Hands where I can see them." Cheryl looked pale. She tried to say something to Mom, but my mother's face had gone blank. She looked so small in that chair, fragile, confused. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about law and property anymore. This was about someone trying to steal her sense of safety. As Karen was cuffed and led out of the house, she hissed at me. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." I leaned in, just enough so she could hear. "You tried to rob the wrong woman." They took Karen away in a cruiser, her hands cuffed behind her back, still trying to maintain the brittle dignity of a woman used to getting her way with polite threats and floral letterhead. Cheryl followed in a separate car, eyes down, mouth clamped shut. Neither of them spoke once more after the front door closed behind them. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. Mom sat motionless in her chair, the folder still resting in her lap like a weight. She looked up at me slowly, her eyes misted but sharp. "Was that real?" she asked, voice fragile. "Mike." "She said she was helping." I knelt in front of her and gently took the folder. "I know, Mom. She was lying." She swallowed, her voice shrinking. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," I said firmly. "You did exactly the right thing. You didn't sign anything." She looked down. "I almost did. That's why I was watching." She flinched slightly at that. I winced internally. "You were watching me?" "Not you. Them." I pulled the fake guardianship form from the folder and held it up to the light. It looked polished, convincing, even had a faintly embossed HOA seal at the top. There were lines for my mother's name, a signature block, and, this part really made my jaw clench, a temporary transitional management clause that would allow the HOA to assume legal custodianship of property and decisions pending full review. They'd printed a checkbox next to that line, checked it in advance. It wasn't just a scam. It was premeditated. Detective Alvarez stayed another hour, taking statements, collecting the form, and asking Mom questions gently but thoroughly. She handled her with the care of someone who'd seen this sort of thing before. Too many times, probably. She explained that Karen and Cheryl would be processed and held until arraignment. Charges would include attempted elder fraud, unauthorized entry, unlawful solicitation, and, if they could prove intent to obtain property through coercion, conspiracy. "What about the other guy?" I asked. "The fake notary from the last visit?" Alvarez raised a brow. "That was new. Camera caught him 2 days ago. No name, but I've got a clear face and partial plates." She nodded. "Send me the footage. We'll ID him. If he's connected to Karen or the HOA legal team, this thing gets a lot bigger." When she finally left, I sat on the back patio and stared at the sunset. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt like I'd stuck my hand in a hornet's nest and only gotten a few out. The rest were still swarming somewhere nearby, waiting. Later that night, while Mom slept, I did what I do best. I dug. County records, HOA filings, licensing directories. I found that Karen Bradshaw, yes, that's her full name, had been the acting president of the Windwood Hills Homeowners Association for 6 years. No criminal record, but a handful of civil complaints filed by former residents who had mysteriously moved, transferred ownership, or entered assisted living within 6 to 12 months of disputes with the HOA board. Patterns. That's the thing with people like Karen. They never leave breadcrumbs, just patterns. In one case, an elderly couple transferred ownership of their home to a community trust just before entering a facility 3 counties away. In another, an old widower signed over rights to community management and was moved into hospice within a week. The trust now owned 3 properties in Windwood Hills. And the legal paperwork, all prepared by the same name, Daniel Klein, Esquire. I'd seen that name before. It was on a flyer Karen had left in our mailbox weeks ago, advertising estate planning services for senior residents, HOA verified. I emailed the files to Detective Alvarez and called in a favor from an old friend still active in the state bar. Network. Daniel Klein had a license. He also had 2 public reprimands on file for overreaching influence in contract procurement. one sealed settlement from a malpractice suit, and, buried deep, a lien placed on his firm by an estate that was later overturned in arbitration. Slick. But not untouchable. I barely noticed time passing as I built the web. Photos, documents, testimony, court records, business filings. I was up until 3 in the morning, piecing together what Karen had probably been doing for years, preying on the vulnerable through a veil of concern and community care. Monday morning came too soon. I met Alvarez at the sheriff's office, this time not as a witness, but as a strategic partner. We sat in a small room with a whiteboard and went over the timeline, the videos, the form, the lawyer, and the prior coincidences. She nodded slowly as I laid it out. We've been suspecting something like this for a while. But this is the first time we've had it all caught on camera. Want the HOA shut down? I asked. This is how we do it. She smiled. Let's start by getting Karen indicted. Then we move up the chain. By noon, a warrant had been signed for Daniel Klein's office. Cheryl, now formally charged, began to crack under pressure. During her initial interrogation, she admitted she had been incentivized to work inside certain homes and prepare them for management transition. She didn't think she was doing anything illegal. Karen said it was just paperwork, that I was helping old people, that they wanted this. She named names, 5 of them, 4 women, 1 man, all over 70, all single, all living within Windwood Hills or bordering it. 2 of them, according to Cheryl, had already signed over guardianship and were relocated to facilities in other counties. It wasn't just a scam. It was a quiet, legal land grab, one power of attorney at a time. The arrests had rattled the nest, but I knew better than to assume the whole hive was dead. Karen and Cheryl were just the front line. What we were dealing with wasn't petty harassment. It was organized, polished, and practiced. And now I had names. 5 people who'd been prepared by Cheryl. 5 families who might not even know what had happened to their relatives. The next step was riskier. I reached out to those families one by one. Some were hard to track down, with disconnected numbers and blank forwarding addresses. Others answered. The first woman I spoke to, daughter of an elderly resident named Clara, hadn't seen her mother in weeks. She thought Clara was in a private facility in Northern Oregon, recommended by the HOA. She didn't remember approving any transfers. When I asked her about guardianship papers, she fell silent. Then she said, Karen said it was just temporary, just while Mom recovered. It was the same script. Another family had been told their father had signed over property voluntarily and was now unable to receive visitors. No contact since. They were stunned when I emailed them scanned documents Cheryl had mentioned. The signatures looked off, stiff, almost copied. Each call was like pulling a nail out of wet wood, painful, slow, and leaving splinters. I handed everything to Detective Alvarez. By then, her department had launched a full task force. They called it a targeted elder exploitation ring, but I had a better word for it: theft. I didn't have time to sit back and wait for the system to grind forward, not when I was still wondering how close this thing had come to stealing my mother's home. So I hired private security. A former Marine named Roy now walked the perimeter every night. I added new cameras, doubled encryption, and changed every lock in the house. My mother, confused but cooperative, nodded through my precautions. Better safe than sorry, she said. She didn't ask when Cheryl was coming back. On Thursday, I got the call I'd been expecting. Someone tried to break into Daniel Klein's office overnight. His receptionist came in that morning to find the door frame cracked and file drawers yanked open. But nothing was missing because the DA had already seized the files the day before. Rookie mistake, or maybe just panic. Daniel Klein himself had gone to ground. His phone was disconnected, his office dark. A warrant was out, but he hadn't been picked up. That only confirmed what I suspected. This man wasn't just writing up shady paperwork. He was coordinating it. Paper trails, notaries, clause language. He probably knew which families had heirs who wouldn't notice until it was too late. Meanwhile, Karen made bail. She was out. Not for long, I hoped, but long enough to make me uneasy. I spotted her 2 days later at a gas station near the HOA entrance. She wore a ball cap pulled low, sunglasses, and she was walking a small white dog I didn't recognize. I pulled in behind her and watched from my truck. She didn't see me. Or if she did, she didn't show it. She walked fast, head down. I took photos anyway, sent them to Alvarez. Still local, I texted. That evening, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. Subject line: Back off while you can. The body was blank except for a single line. You think this ends with Karen? No signature, no traceable metadata. I ran it through a VPN trace and hit 3 dead ends in 5 minutes. But the timing? Perfect. I didn't show Mom. I didn't want her more afraid than she already was. I told her Karen's group wouldn't be coming around anymore, that she could relax, that we were safe now. I said the words. I didn't believe them. I knew what this really was now. A long game. A slow, deliberate process that depended on confusion, silence, and time. And even though I'd blown open their playbook, that didn't mean they wouldn't just change the rules. So I tightened mine. I upgraded my lawyer, hired an elder law specialist with courtroom experience and zero patience for HOA bull. We filed preemptive cease and desist letters to every HOA board member whose name had appeared in any of the documents recovered from Karen's folder, not just Wynwood Hills. Adjacent boards, too. I wasn't just protecting Mom anymore. I was digging up the rot. Meanwhile, Alvarez updated me. 3 of the 5 families I'd reached had filed formal complaints. One of them had a forensic document examiner confirm that their father's signature on the guardianship form was a traceover, a Hamasit Vani. That was the trigger. A second round of indictments was filed, 2 more arrests. And then, finally, Daniel Klein was picked up at the airport in Spokane, Washington. One-way ticket to Costa Rica. Briefcase full of sealed documents. Laptop with an encrypted folder labeled HOA_transition phase 2. They cracked it 2 days later. Inside, a spreadsheet. Names, ages, property values, projected willingness, estimated family contact, recommended caregiver match. Over 100 entries. My mother's name was entry number 23. The spreadsheet changed everything. This wasn't just about Mom. It wasn't even about our street or neighborhood anymore. It was about a system, one carefully built, one that relied on fear, on silence, and on the devastating power of polite paperwork. They had names, ages, addresses, even notes like no family nearby or resistant needs grooming, clinical, predatory, efficient. I printed the list, blacked out every name but my mother's, and brought it to her the next morning. I didn't want to scare her, but I needed her to understand why the house suddenly had double locks and why a man named Roy was now stationed out front reading a dog-eared Tom Clancy novel every night. She looked at the paper for a long time. Her finger brushed the line with her name. Then she nodded. "You always were the smart one," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Your brother would have probably just thrown a punch." I smiled. That's why he runs a bar. Still, she looked smaller now, less like the woman who raised me, more like someone being held upright by sheer will. This wasn't how she was supposed to spend her retirement, held hostage by paperwork and HOA power plays. And I wasn't going to let her become another line in a spreadsheet. Meanwhile, the case was snowballing. With Klein in custody and the encrypted files decrypted, the DA built a full narrative. Over the past 4 years, Wynwood Hills HOA, under Karen's leadership, had exploited dozens of elderly residents, most of them single, isolated, or medically dependent. Cheryl wasn't the only caregiver involved. There were at least 3 others. Some had nursing licenses, some didn't. All had access, all had incentives. Karen, of course, denied everything. Claimed she was only following community procedures. Claimed the documents were standard operating forms. Claimed the spreadsheet was part of a wellness initiative, but the chain of evidence was overwhelming. Fake notaries, forged signatures, manipulated families, altered medical assessments. One by one, victims were contacted. Some were too frail to testify. Some didn't remember much. But others, like Clara's daughter, were livid. And they wanted justice. I was asked to give a statement for the grand jury. I didn't hesitate. In the meantime, things got darker. Roy called me one night around 11. "Got a visitor," he said. Didn't ring the bell. Just stood outside the gate for a while. Black hoodie, face mostly hidden. Walked off when I stepped out. I checked the security footage. The figure was male, tall, broad shoulders, no obvious weapons, but he stood facing the camera, looking at it, just long enough to be unsettling. No note, no message, just presence. We filed a report. I sent the clip to Alvarez, who confirmed it wasn't anyone they had in custody. Could be a message, she said. Could be nothing. But keep an eye out. I started sleeping with my phone on my chest. Next morning, I found tire tracks in the gravel near our mailbox. Not from my car, not from Roy's truck. Someone had driven up, paused, then backed out without turning around. By now, I was operating on caffeine and nerves. The HOA was imploding. The board called an emergency meeting, without Karen, of course, and publicly suspended all legacy directives pending legal review. But the remaining board members were scrambling. They claimed ignorance, which might have worked if half of them weren't named in emails found on Klein's laptop, discussing things like streamlined estate transition and preliminary transfer memos. They'd known, maybe not all of it, but enough. And now, the residents were furious. I started getting calls. Strangers, neighbors I barely knew, wanted to talk. One man, Joe, said he'd been threatened with fines when he refused to let a community auditor into his late uncle's house. A woman named Teresa said her mother had been visited by someone offering to help with long-term housing planning. 3 days after she returned from the hospital, everyone had a Karen story. One resident organized a town hall. I wasn't planning to speak, but when I got there and saw the crowd, dozens of people, most of them angry, confused, or scared, I changed my mind. I told them what had happened, about my mother, about the cameras, about the spreadsheet. I didn't hold back. By the end, the room was silent. Then someone clapped, then everyone did. They weren't just angry anymore. They were ready. The next day, the county filed for emergency injunctions to freeze all HOA-controlled community trust and to suspend financial access from anyone linked to the operation. The judge approved it within hours. Karen's assets were seized. Klein was denied bail, and one of the caregivers flipped, turned state's evidence, said Karen had promised them each a cut of the properties transferred in exchange for their help. Said this wasn't just about Windwood Hills. There were 3 other neighborhoods in nearby counties under similar programs. We weren't just dealing with a local HOA scam. This was a network. I didn't expect the fallout to come so fast. Within days of the town hall, the story hit local news. The headline was blunt: HOA fraud scheme targeted elderly homeowners. Authorities investigate multi-county network. Karen's face was on every screen. Some old posed photo of her in a blazer with pearls, looking like someone's PTA president, not the woman I saw in my driveway, offering my mother a slow, smiling eviction. Reporters parked on the street. Neighbors came by to thank me. A few even cried. One woman hugged me so tightly I nearly dropped the groceries. I didn't know half of their names, but they all knew mine now. Mom didn't understand the full scope of what was happening, but she saw the change. "You're always so busy these days," she said gently. "You weren't supposed to come here and end up doing all this." I smiled and kissed her forehead. Yeah, well, guess the HOA had other plans. In private, I was exhausted, barely sleeping, jumping at shadows. But I couldn't stop now. Not when the whole scheme was starting to unravel, and we were finally pulling the right threads. Alvarez told me Daniel Klein had started talking. Under pressure, and with the damning files found on his laptop, he'd agreed to a plea deal, offering full cooperation in exchange for reduced sentencing. He named names, showed email chains, described the strategy: identify vulnerable seniors, apply light pressure under the guise of assistance, and then slowly take over legal control, guardianships, trusts, or power of attorney, depending on which method was easiest to process through HOA. Channels. Most victims didn't fight. Most families didn't realize what was happening until the properties were already signed away. Some never found out at all. It was legal theft, organized, engineered, sanitized by signatures, and now it was public. State investigators got involved. HOA oversight bodies were forced to respond. 3 other homeowner associations in neighboring counties were placed under emergency review. A task force was formed, but Karen, she went quiet. After being rearrested on the new federal fraud charges, she clammed up. Her lawyer tried spinning it as a community-minded woman misled by her legal counsel, but nobody was buying that anymore. The spreadsheet alone nuked any chance of sympathy. One entry on the list stood out. A name I recognized: Walter Lindstrom, my old math teacher. He'd lived alone 2 streets over. I remembered his house. He used to hand out full-size candy bars at Halloween. The entry beside his name read, "Confirmed POA signed. Caregiver transfer complete." I drove by his house the next morning. It was empty. Curtains drawn, grass overgrown. There was a lockbox on the front door. I called Alvarez. 2 hours later, she confirmed what I feared. Walter had been placed in a memory care facility. His home had been signed over to a community trust 2 months earlier. No family listed, no heirs contacted, just gone. He hadn't even made the news. That night, I stood in the hallway outside my mom's room watching her sleep. The house smelled like chamomile and peppermint. The lights were low, safe, familiar. And for a moment, I let myself think about what could have happened. What almost happened if I hadn't been here that weekend. If I hadn't installed cameras. If I hadn't asked questions. I clenched my fists and stepped outside. I was done playing defense. Next morning, I filed a civil suit against Karen, Daniel Klein, the remaining board members of Wynwood Hills, and the affiliated legal entities tied to the fraudulent transfers. I wasn't the only one. 3 other families joined in. Then 5 more. Within a week, a class action was forming. Our claim? Elder abuse, fraud, emotional distress, and unlawful property seizure. We had video evidence. We had signatures. We had receipts. And this time, we had the momentum. The HOA board, already buckling under investigation, dissolved officially within 48 hours of the lawsuit's filing. The bank accounts were frozen. Community documents were seized. The property transfers made in the last 2 years were placed under independent audit. Karen, sitting in a holding cell, probably thought she could delay things, drag it out, plead ignorance, find some legal loophole. She didn't realize something. She tried to take everything from the wrong family, because I wasn't just some overworked son showing up for tea. I was the damn firewall. The court date came faster than expected. Karen arrived in cuffs, chin high, but eyes hollow. Klein was beside her, visibly aged, avoiding cameras like a roach under a spotlight. Their attorneys tried to delay, citing complex case materials and community confusion. The judge wasn't impressed. He set a preliminary hearing for 2 weeks out. The media called it the HOA house theft scandal. I didn't correct them. Let them boil it down. I knew what it really was. Systematic abuse hiding behind bylaws and polite letters. Mom stayed home. She didn't need to relive it in a courtroom. I sat with our lawyer, Marcia, a bulldog in heels, and watched as everything unraveled in real time. The prosecution brought the spreadsheet, the fake signatures, the forged notary stamps, surveillance footage, audio recordings, victim statements. One by one, it painted the picture. A network of predators using the trust of the elderly and the authority of HOAs to take homes they didn't earn. Karen looked smaller every time a new piece of evidence hit the screen. And then came the worst of it. The testimony of the caregiver who flipped. She detailed conversations, payment plans, even meetings at local diners where they'd discuss targets over coffee and pie. The courtroom went still when she said, "We never thought anyone would notice. Most families don't. I noticed." The final blow came when forensic analysts confirmed that several signatures had been copy-pasted between documents. Same angle, same pressure patterns. It was a paper-thin operation trying to look official. By the time closing arguments came, there was no doubt. Karen was found guilty on multiple counts: fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit theft by deception, Klein too. Several HOA board members entered plea deals to avoid prison but were permanently barred from serving on any board again. Assets were seized, homes reassigned back to their rightful owners, or their families, when it was too late. Mom's name was cleared in every record. She didn't lose her home. She didn't lose herself. Back at the house, life settled. The cameras stayed. Roy stayed. I stayed for a while. Cooked breakfast, made her laugh, even fixed the old garden bench she used to read on before her legs gave out. She called me her bodyguard with a law degree. The lawsuit settled quietly. 7 families received compensation. I declined mine. I didn't do this for money. One day I asked Mom if she remembered Karen's first visit. She thought for a moment. She had a clipboard, she said. And a smile too sharp for her face. I nodded. That's how they get in. I made one last change before I left to go back to my own home. I replaced the front gate sign. Now it reads, "Private property. Entry by invitation only. Trespassers will be prosecuted." And under it, in smaller script, "Love welcome, liars not."